that's not bad. Oh. What boat are you in? Boat 1, you hate butter, you don't have it in your house, you think it's unhealthy. Boat 2, you think it's unhealthy, but you love butter. You just made pancakes with it. Or boat 3, you're just here for the vibes. You might eat butter every now and then, but you don't really know if it's good for you or not. Well, this video is the river that all those boats are in, and we're headed upstream to the truth. It's a good analogy. Thank you. Butter, friend or foe, enemy or ally? Welcome to No Loud Cobra Choir, where I out-research your doctor to learn answers to your questions, whether you're confused or just curious. My name is Johnny. I've been waiting to talk about this one. First things first, let's not be tribal about butter. We're talking about butter, like lower your shoulders. Let's approach this with an open mind. I don't know what it is about the butter conversation that turns us into barbarians. You know, people get defensive over what they believe. That's actually never okay. It's like we take everything in about a topic that we think will suffice, and then we just completely shut the door on our conclusion. Never completely shut the door on your conclusion. Always leave it slightly cracked, because that leaves room for new insight. That is science. That is genius. Butter has a bad rep, and most of us don't even know why we think it is bad. Do you know why? Let's go over it.
Why didn't we think of this before, Batman?
Hindsight is often better than foresight, old chum.
Ah, the 1960s. Back when the talk of the town literally meant just that. The news hit a little different back then. You couldn't just scroll to the next headline. Time magazine was global, and its covers were usually reserved for notable figures or celebrities. So when the issue of January 13, 1961 displayed a man in doctor's clothing shooting a solemn, sharp gaze of grim into the eyes of the reading world, we were prompted to listen up. I can't ask 100 people to go through their phone contacts and expect to find one mug named Ansel Keys. Like, what? That man was named Ansel Keys. See, Ansel was a scientist. He was brilliant and driven. He was a standout pioneer of discovering how disease was connected to nutrition. This was around the time that we figured out smoking might probably be bad for us. McDonald's was fresh on the scene. We just had a world war that sped up modern day food processing as we know it, like, you know, lessening the steps from package to stomach, extending its shelf life. We invented Doritos in this time. America was transitioning, but there was this weird thing that kept happening. Heart attacks. We knew that they were the result of blocked arteries, but we didn't know what blocked the arteries. If you look into the articles of the past, you will realize that specifically middle-aged men in executive positions were suffering from these heart attacks. One man particularly put the nation on high alert: the president. In 1955, the widely beloved 34th President Dwight D. Eisenhower suffered a non-fatal heart attack. America demanded an answer, and we turned to the medical community. And a few years later, we got our answer: saturated fat. Saturated fat is just a word for a type of fat molecule, and butter is considered a saturated fat because it has a high percentage of said molecule. But at the same time, who cares? Because we don't eat molecules, we eat food. People in biblical times were eating butter and didn't have a clue what a molecule was. Back to the Time magazine story. This is what the takeaway is. Ansel Keys absolutely rips apart fat. Anything related to fat. Fat edible fat, dietary fat, fat people, anything fat adjacent, all fat, all bad. The low fat movement that ran America into drinking skim milk and staying away from marbled meat, it all started right here. Low fat everything, low fat Bluetooth. The story transcribed that cholesterol was the problem. Eat fat, gain cholesterol. Get fat, get heart disease. In that order. That means no more eggs, meat, dairy, or anything fat. Not only were these foods deemed as the problem, but stress, hypertension, smoking, and physical inactivity weren't seen as the problem. Ansel was backed up by the American Heart Association as well, which a few weeks later released a report basically echoing what was reported in the Time cover story. Yeah, Ansel was one of the authors. So really, America's getting this advice from one big party. I kept my opinion out of this video up until this point, because here's the kicker. Ansel Keys claims he doesn't know all of the science and mechanisms of cholesterol, but he regards its connection to heart disease as proved. To not fully understand something, but to yet draw a conclusion, that is not science. Now, quickly, I don't want this to be me painting Ansel Keys as a bad guy. A lot of people have done that. There's been books, there's been podcast episodes, blogs, videos, a bunch of people kind of painting him out to be this villain. And after we have learned so much about heart disease and cholesterol, we realized like we were super wrong. Like we were way off. Where do we even get this information from? Naturally, we tracked it back and we found Ansel Keys' work. So he became the villain. But there are institutions defending his work as well. It's not easy being the first to something. I'm not choosing a side. It is what it is. But we have to look at what made Ansel Keys say that eating saturated fat was bad. We gotta rewind a little bit. Before Time magazine, before all the hullabaloo, like before this thing blew up, what happened? Italy was enjoying healthy hearts, so much so that an Italian colleague of Keys reached out to him and said, come see for yourself, heart disease is no problem here. Just like that, Keys is in Italy. He brings his equipment, he's measuring blood pressure and heart stuff all on the streets, he's in the hospitals with it, and he finds virtually no heart issues. After noting how different the Italians ate, Keys started to form the diet heart theory, the hypothesis that saturated fat leads to elevated cholesterol, which leads to heart disease. He traveled a bit more, analyzed more data, analyzed more blood, and started to find a relationship that supported his theory. In 1955, the World Health Organization hosted a meeting to talk about heart attacks. Ansel felt it was finally his time to share what he had been discovering. And people who knew Keys said he kind of spoke in a blunt way. He was given the floor. With all the confidence in the world, he presented them the diet heart theory. And he was rejected. Borderline mocked. He was shot down in the most professional academic way. You ever been insulted by somebody by words you had to look up after? His evidence was diminished because it was an argument of association. It was all just based on stuff he just kind of seen. Feeling dejected, Ansel promised himself he's gonna prove these snotty nose who fellowshipping folk wrong. He said that, those are his words. Ansel would then go on to start one of the most controversial studies of all time, the 7-country study. United States, Italy, Greece, Yugoslavia, Netherlands, Finland, and Japan. Ansel and his team of researchers got busy. They put in some groundwork in all of these countries. We're talking about analyzing blood pressure, ECGs, anthropometric measurements, cholesterol, the whole shebang. Like the data collection was real. But even more real was his hypothesis. Ansel felt that he had finally collected some legit data to back up what he thought in the first place. And he took it to the streets. Next thing you know, he's on the cover of Time magazine. He gets as celebritized as a dude in a lab coat could get. We're talking Bill Nye the Science Guy, Dexter, Curious George. He had his time to shine, but like I said, as we grew more knowledgeable about the subject, we realized that his study didn't really hold up. In fact, it was torn apart. It was broken down and scrutinized. He was accused of cherry picking certain countries to support his theory. He was accused of measuring the Greek folk during Lent so that he could skew the results. He was accused of not regarding sugar intake, a whole bunch of stuff. That's where you get into debate with all the other nerds. This nerd, me, Johnny, myself, and you as well. We're gonna talk about the real problem here. Look at you. You're beautiful. All right, now hit the like button. Come on, let's have a mutual relationship. Are you ready for this? You ready? The problem, what is this? The problem with Ansel Keys' study was that it was observational. In scientific study, there is a spectrum of quality when it comes to data. The gold standard yielding the highest form of respectable, legitimate data comes from what we call a randomized controlled trial, or RCT. So in an RCT, if we're measuring diet and heart attacks, we're going to separate people into groups. Group 1, we're gonna feed them food we think will cause a heart attack. Group 2, we're gonna feed them foods we think will not cause a heart attack. And then group 3, to really balance out the results, we're not gonna give them anything. You adjust for variables like age and sex, and boom, you got your results. You can even make that more rigorous by making the participants or even the researchers blind to what they're testing. You can even throw in a placebo effect somewhere. The point is that there is intervention. Observational studies lack that. You go in, make some measurements, observe, then make some more. Observational studies are still legit science, and that's actually how we start things off. We make an observation, we make a guess, and then we test it. But at the very best, Observational studies can form a hypothesis. You were taught this in middle school, an educated guess. You can't form a conclusion, let alone tell Time magazine about the results you found in a study where you didn't intervene. You ain't tested none yet. The reason we have low-fat anything in the grocery store to this day is because of this 7 countries observational study. We observed that ice cream sales go up in the summer, but so does horrendous acts. Does one cause the other? I would hope not. You can't prove cause and effect through observation alone. Ladies and gentlemen, now for the part you've all been waiting for. It's time for the truth about saturated fat and butter. Meta-analysis on saturated fat. 45 studies analyzed, 347,000 plus participant total. Conclusion? No solid evidence that dietary saturated fat is associated with an increased risk of a heart attack. This was going to be the study that kicked off a montage of me listing a bunch of other studies with similar findings. Bam, case closed. But I had to look a little closer. That study garnered a response from other scientists who believed that the conclusion that they drew was inaccurate because of an overadjustment. An overadjustment can skew the results toward their bias in order to appease their hypothesis. In other words, scientists called them out for cheating the system.
You have been cheated and lied to.
Not only that, but one of the authors had a connection with a dairy institution, so there could be bias. Measuring the effects of saturated fat is inherently difficult. Not only that, but all studies aren't using the same type of saturated fat, and there's levels of quality as well. Every single study I come across hardly ever mentions the quality of the saturated fat. And even less studies directly compare the quality of butter, but I found one, and it's a good one. A controlled, double-blind, randomized intervention study. The researchers weighed up free-roaming cows fed on grass-fed diet against those raised in conventional standards, raised mostly indoors on corn silage, wheat barley silage, and a bunch of other stuff. Just so we're clear, cows, if it wasn't for human intervention, would probably eat about 90% grass. They wouldn't eat corn or grain. Definitely not corn. They can't even reach the top of the stalk, so they're not designed to. We really don't know all the things that conventional farmers are putting into these feeds. These are just the things that they have shared with us. Some farmers feed their cows straight candy.
He began to buy secondhand candy.
It has a higher ratio of fat than actually feeding straight corn. Lots of happy cattle.
Just like humans, cows are what they eat. And if we think for 1 second that a stressed out cow fed candy is going to produce the same quality butter as a grass-fed free roaming cow, then we tripping. The study comparing the two groups of cows found major differences in their butter. Conventional butter has an overall higher content of saturated fat than grass-fed butter. Conventional butter has 17% less omega-9 acid, 33% less omega-3 acid, and the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is 45% higher than grass-fed butter. Ooh! Now, around here, like I said, we don't eat molecules, we eat food. So all the omega talk, it can go a little deep. I actually made a separate video on that you can check out in the description. For now, we have to understand that these are two of the same foods, but nutritionally are like night and day. The advice was to replace butter with unsaturated fats. And trust me, we've done that. Vegetable oil is an umbrella term for all the oils we consume in our foods: soybean oil, sunflower oil, peanut oil, canola oil, and so on. These oils are degraded basically the instant humans touch them. We chemically treat them, which we winterize them, deodorize them, degum them, neutralize them, bleach them. I don't want anything to do with anything that's been through that kind of trauma. After these oils are produced, they're thrown into basically every packaged food you see in the grocery stores and in the gas stations. I'm not kidding, check the label. They're processed to the point to where they are a fraction of what they once were, and that comes with side effects. I used to be a busboy. I was underpaid and poorly treated. Every night I went home with a bad attitude and a wet lap because of all the dishes I washed. I imagine this is how our cells feel when we give them these oils. This is the big question though. Johnny, why do we put these oils in our food? It's hard to consume or even produce foods without some form of fat. We need it for texture, flavor, to bind ingredients, so on and so on. Of course, big corporations aren't necessarily concerned about which oil does the trick, as long as it's cheap, because their main concern is their bottom line. We were already given natural fats from the earth, but we developed a system that Frankenstein them. We aren't eating the same butter our great-great-great-grandparents ate, and they sure wouldn't be eating no man-made margarine.
Wow, this is garbage.
Fatty acids are special puzzle pieces that the body cannot live without. The brain is 60% fat, and our cell membranes are 50% fat. We need fat to absorb certain vitamins, A, D, E, and K. We need saturated fat, monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, and high quality butter provides a vast array of them all. We need FAT. All right, folks, time for another episode of Johnny, Tell Me the Benefits of Grass-Fed Butter, please. I'm your host, Johnny, and let's get into it. It's one of the only places you can get K2, a vitamin responsible for making sure calcium ends up in the right spots and not the wrong ones. It is also rich in the vitamin that is special and famous for eyesight. But vitamin A is also important for the immune system, so you don't get sick of these people. It has CLA, MCT, and omega-3. We're talking a fortified heart, a more efficient metabolism, and a sharper brain so you can come up with better comebacks when somebody disrespects you. Being told to avoid saturated fat is lazy advice, as well as being told to sit up straight. No kidding, I made a video on that and it's coming up on the screen. I'm gonna get up out y'all way.